Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's weekend reflections on this, the 30th of March 2024. Today, I would like to read from this wonderful book, Imam Al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulum Al-Din. This is volume 3 of an English translation published in 1995. Translated by Al-Hajj Maulana Fazlul-Karim. And I would like to read from this chapter, the harms of tongue. The harms of the tongue. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Know, dear readers, that the tongue is a great asset of a man or a person. And I wonder out of the wonderful creation, and I wonder out of the wonderful creations of God. Though it is insignificant, its power is unlimited. Its sins are heinous. Its virtues are great. And infidelity, the last limit of sin, and infidelity and faith do not find expression except through the tongue. It is the last limit of sins and virtues. Tongue can express what has been created and what has not been created. Tongue explains what intellect bears in mind, whether truth or untrue. Tongue may be said to be an agent of intellect. No other organ has got such power to express the mind. The sight of the eye extends only to figures and colors, and not to any other thing. Ear has got power over only sounds, and not to any other thing. The power of the tongue, however, is unlimited. It has got power over good and bad. The dangers of the tongue are useless talks, quarrels, disputes, rebukes, scoldings, harsh words, cursing, false speaking, backbiting, self-praise, etc. We shall proceed to discuss them one by one. Before we go into that, Imam Al-Ghazali discusses the merits of silence. The dangers and harms of the tongue are many, and there is no rescue from them except silence. For this reason, Sharia recommends it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "He who keeps silent gets salvation." He also said, "Silence is a rule and few people can observe it." The father of Sufyan asked the Prophet, "O Prophet of God, give me such good news about Islam, which I shall ask nobody after you." And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Say, I have believed, and stand on it firmly." I asked him, "What matter shall I fear most?" He hinted with his hands at the tongue. Akbar bin Amr said, "I asked, O Messenger of Allah, how can I get salvation?" He said, "Hold your tongue, make your house spacious, and repent for your sins." The Prophet ﷺ said, "If a man can give me guarantee of the things placed between his two cheeks and his two things, I can give him guarantee of paradise." He said, "Who is safe from the harms of his belly, his sexual organs, and his tongue is safe from all troubles." For these three organs, the majority of people are destroyed. The Prophet was asked about a great virtue which admits one to paradise. He said, "Control of two hollow things, your mouth and your sexual organs." He meant, when he said the mouth, he was referring to his tongue. Hazrat Muaz bin Jabal said, "I asked, O Prophet of God, shall we be punished for what we utter?" He said, "O Ibn Jabal, your mother be heavy with you. Will a man be overturned in hell over his nose except for the harms of his tongue?" Abdullah Saqafi said, I asked, O Prophet of God, what matter do you fear for me? He caught his tongue and said this. Hazrat Muaz asked, O Prophet of God, what action is best? The Prophet ﷺ drew out his tongue and placed his finger on it and said, the faith of a man does not become all right until his mind does not become so. And his mind does not become all right till his tongue does not become so. He from whose harm his neighbor is not safe will not enter paradise. So this is referring to, the connection between the mind and the tongue, between what we think and what we say. And the Prophet said that if our neighbor isn't safe from us, then we will not enter paradise. One of the problems is what people say about each other. And this creates immense problems for society. Many of the problems result from that. Because, if you say bad things about someone or, say things behind their back, maybe they will get agitated, maybe they will act upon that. One thing leads to another, and it increases, and it creates immense problems. Once, Hazrat Umar saw Hazrat Abu Bakr, may Allah accept them both, drawing out his tongue and asked him, O Caliph of the people, what are you doing? He said, it drags me to the place of destruction. The Prophet said, there is no such limb of the body which will not complain to God about the harsh treatment of the tongue. Hazrat Ibn Masud said, the Prophet has said, major sins of a man accrue from his tongue. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, God keeps the hidden things of a man's secret who controls his tongue. God saves one who keeps his anger under control. God accepts the excesses of one who shows excuse to God. Once, Hazrat Muaz asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, O Prophet of God, advise me. He said, worship in such a way if you see God and consider you as one of the dead. I shall let you know a more important thing than this, if you like. He then hinted with his hand at the tongue. Hazrat Safwan bin Sulaiman was once asked by the Prophet ﷺ, shall I not inform you about the easiest divine service and the most comfortable thing for the body? Silence and good conduct. The Prophet ﷺ said, let one who believes in God and the next world speak good or remain silent. Speak good or remain silent. This is something the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said. And my mum told me that as a child. I didn't grow up in a Muslim household, but I remember my mum telling me as a child, either if you can say something nice, then speak something nice. If you can't, then don't say anything at all. And you think this is actually, it's hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as well, but how many people in this day and age live up to that? Such a simple advice. The Prophet ﷺ said, save your tongue from the talks other than good, and you can defeat the devil. He also said, God is near every utterance of a man. So let him take care of what he utters. Be careful what you say, because God is taking note of everything you say. The Prophet ﷺ said, People are divided into three classes: looters of war booties, talkers of useless things, and those who are safe. A looter of war booties is one who makes zikr of God. A safe man is he who remains silent. A useless talker is one who holds unnecessary talk. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, the tongue of a believer keeps behind his mind. When he wishes to talk, he sends it through his tongue. The tongue of a hypocrite keeps in front of his mind. When he wishes to talk, he sends it through his tongue without any thinking. SubhanAllah, this is something similar to what my dad advised me when I was younger. He said, think before you speak, Paul, think. And again, how many people today just gossip and just chatter, whatever immediately comes on their mind without them thinking about it, and they just say it. It creates a lot of problems for everybody, for them as well. Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, said, there are 10 portions of divine services, 9 of which are in silence, and the remaining one is loneliness. The Prophet ﷺ said, he who talks much commits blunders. He who blunders much commits many sins. So someone who talks a lot makes a lot of mistakes. And someone who makes a lot of mistakes obviously will make a lot of sins as well, because some of those mistakes will be sinful. For one whose sins are great, hellfire is good. Caliph Omar bin Abdulaziz said, he who remembers death much remains satisfied with little. He who counts his words in his actions talks little. A wise man said, silence gives 2 benefits to a man: safety of religion and knowing of friends. Hazrat Hassan al-Basri said, once many people were talking in the assembly of Caliph Muawiyah. The saint Anaf bin Qais only remained silent. He said to him, O Abu Bakr, what is the matter with you? Why are you not talking? He said, if I talk lies, I fear God. If I tell the truth, I fear you. You understand? So it's like this saint was thinking, if I say something is wrong, anything is untrue, I'm scared of God, so I can't say that. And he was also aware he was in the presence of the Caliph, the most powerful man in that part of the world. So if he said something which was true and it offended the Caliph, then he would be in trouble with the Caliph. So whatever he said, he couldn't win. So better to stay silent. The sage Mansur al-Mas used to the sage Mansur bin Ma'az used to not to hold talks after Isha prayer for 40 years. So he kept silent after Isha prayers is what it means, for 40 years. Sorry, some of these translations are not done by native English speakers, so it's sometimes the translation is like not ideal, but still useful. Bismillah. Four kinds of talks. One kind of talk is always beneficial. 2, one kind of talk is always harmful. 3, one kind of talk is mixed with harm and benefit. 4, one kind of talk has got no harm or benefit. As to the talk which is always harmful, it is essentially necessary to remain silent therefrom. As to the talk which is mixed with harm and benefit, it is necessary to remain silent therefrom. The talk which has got no benefit or harm is useless. 3/4 of the talk of the fourth kind are useless. The fourth kind, remember, is a talk that's got no harm or benefit. So 3/4 of the talk of the fourth kind are useless, except only the remaining 1/4. There is fault in this 1/4 also, this quarter also, as it cannot be distinguished whether there is therein any secret show, backbiting, excessive talk, etc. He who remains silent gets salvation. So you see, there's four kinds of talk. One that's always, it's got benefit in it. So if like this, I'm talking about Imam Al-Ghazali, his teachings from the Quran and Sunnah. If I'm talking about the Quran or the Sunnah as well, or if I'm talking about some good education or something, there is always benefit in those things. One kind of talk is always harmful. Anything like backbiting or gossiping or saying bad things about people, no matter how entertaining, it's always harmful. So you should always keep away from that if you can. One kind of talk is mixed with harm and benefit. So there's some good in it and there's some bad in it. So that's something which should be avoided because there's bad in it as well. And one kind of talk has got no benefit and no harm. Imam Al-Ghazali then lists 20 harms of tongue, 20 harms of things you can say. Now, I'm not going to read all of what's written here because there's a lot and we'll be here for a long time. So I'm going to summarize. Bismillah. So I'll go through and I'll read the titles first. 20 harms of tongue. Unnecessary. 1 is unnecessary talk. 2 is useless talks. 3 is the second harm of tongue. 4 is the, so I'll read the first bit and then I'll read the title and I'll read the first few lines because there's paragraphs and paragraphs written on this. This is how scholars dealt with things, you know. 1, unnecessary talk. The best condition is to save the tongue from backbiting, falsehood, show, quarrels, disputes, etc. There are such words therein which are not beneficial and which do harm to others. If you hold useless talk, you lose time and you shall have to render accounts for useless talk. You'll have to render an account to Allah. So skipping on to the next section. Useless talks are talks, this is 2, useless talks are talks which, if uttered, do not cause any benefit and do not do harm in this world and the next. But they're useless because there's no necessity and no benefit in them. 3, the second harm of tongue. The second harm is excessive talk. This means to utter such words that are of no use and hold such talks are of no use. So this is like showing off, basically. Superfluous, showing off, and making oneself look good through what they're saying. 4, the third harm of tongue. This is useless talk in untrue matters and to spend talks in the actions of sins. For instance, to state the beauties of a woman. Now, I mean, it depends on the context with that. But if you're just like talking about that to incite people to do something which is not going to be good, that's no good. To tell about the benefits of drinking wine, or to praise the sinners, or to discuss the comforts of the rich, to narrate the oppressions of kings, rulers, tyrants, and such and such. So this is talking about bad things. So there's obviously harm in that, and especially if it becomes enjoyable. Also involved in this is quarrels and disputes which are unlawful. The Prophet said, don't quarrel with your brother, don't cut jokes with him, and don't break promise with him. Now, the Prophet ﷺ had a great sense of humor. So it doesn't mean that you don't joke at all, but you're careful about how you joke. You don't joke in a way which causes harm to people. 5, disputes about wealth and properties. Another harm of the tongue is disputes about properties. The Prophet said, the greatest object of hatred to God is he who holds greatest disputes about properties. He said, he who disputes about properties with another out of ignorance remains always in the displeasure of God till he becomes silent. So that's something to keep in mind as well. 6, to make ornamentation in talks. Another harm is the tongue is to make ornamentation in talks, to disclose oratory and give lectures with ornamental words. So this is speaking very fancy, looking good in an educated way. Bit similar to the previous one of the previous chapters or pointers. Hazrat Umar said, eloquence in talks is attended with the eloquence of the devil. So it's just something to be aware of, you know. Obscene 7, obscene and bad talks. These talks are prohibited. Some of the talks are impurities. Some of these talks are impurities. The Prophet ﷺ said, gave up obscene talks, as God does not love obscene and excessive talks. So, you know, certain things it's not appropriate to talk about. And we shouldn't just be like indulging in those. 8, curse. Another evil of the tongue is to curse anything, be it even an animal. Imam Al-Ghazali mentions even animals. You're not allowed to curse animals, or a person, or a lifeless thing. This is condemned. 9, songs and poetries. Another harm of the tongue is songs and poetries. The good of poetry is good, and the bad of poetry is bad. So it doesn't mean all poetry, but this is in a particular context. The Prophet ﷺ said, it is better to fill up the belly of a man with pus than to fill it with poetry. In short, poetry is not lawful if it, in short, poetry is not unlawful if it does not contain evil or indecent words. As the Prophet ﷺ said, there is wisdom in some poetry. So the thing with poetry and songs is it depends what it is about. It depends on the content of the song. If it is something which inspires towards good, it is halal. If it is something which inspires towards bad or sinful actions, then that poetry or song is sinful. 10, laugh and jokes. This is another harm of tongue, laughing and jokes. Basically, these are not commendable, but these are not harmful within limits. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't dispute with your brother and cut jokes with him. Excessive jokes and continued jokes are unlawful. If they are done continuously, they are included within sports and plays. I'll skip down here. The Prophet ﷺ said, I cut jokes, but I don't say except the truth. So you see, it's not necessarily sinful if someone tells a joke, but it depends on what the joke is. Is that joke going to be something which causes harm to someone else? This is what the Prophet ﷺ was criticizing. This is what Imam Al-Ghazali here is highlighting. But if they are harmless jokes, which are not hurting anyone, that's okay. The Prophet ﷺ also had a great sense of humor. And this also, you can see this is followed on by the next 11, ridicule. Ridicule is unlawful. It's haram, as it gives pain to the heart of another, and thus he becomes sorry. You see, ridicule is often tied in with those sort of jokes. So it's not surprising that the one follows the other in Ghazali's list here, because people often ridicule someone with awful jokes which are not really funny. Even if they're funny to other people, they're definitely not funny to the person being targeted. This is forbidden. It's very sinful. 12. To disclose secret talks is unlawful, as it gives pain to the mind of another. The Prophet ﷺ said, when a man tells you something and asks you to keep it secret, it is a trust. He said, it is a trust between you. Now, this is something I understand as a chaplain, because part of being a chaplain is I often have to listen to students, staff, other people who need to confide in someone. There is something which is bothering them. They talk about sometimes very personal issues. I must not disclose anything from those conversations. It is called, when you take into confidence. And whatever people tell me in confidence, it's in confidence. It's not to be discussed with anybody. And this is something the Prophet ﷺ also said in a hadith. So, to disclose these things is a big sin. 13, false promise. It is another harm of tongue, as it wants to make a promise in haste, but it does not become possible to fulfill it. As a result, it is broken. So, and the Prophet ﷺ said, promise is like a present. He said, promise is a kind of debt, or greater than that. So, if you promise something to someone, you must do absolutely everything in your power to fulfill that promise. Otherwise, it is a big sin. So, this is one of the forms of talk which also can cause harm. Some people, they promise this and promise that. They're not really promising. They're just saying they promise. This is called false promise. And we shouldn't do this. And this is connected to the next title, 14, falsehood. Another danger of the tongue is false speaking and false oath. These are great sins and heinous faults. In the first year of the emigration, the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ said, be careful of falsehood, as it is in the companion of the sinners, and both will be in hell. He also said, falsehood is a door of hypocrisy. So, falsehood, we have to be aware. Don't just say stuff without knowing if it's even true. And people do this all the time these days. People say things which they think is true and is not true. They've never checked. They've never analyzed. They just say what they've heard from somewhere else. This is speaking falsehood. We should check first before we pass things on, or at least be reasonably sure. 15, backbiting. Know, oh dear readers, that there came numerous warnings in Sharia regarding backbiting. Many people are accustomed to backbiting, and very few people are free from it. God says, don't backbite one another. Do you like to eat the flesh of your dead brother? Rather, you abhor it. So this is actually in Quran. Allah compares backbiting to eating the flesh of a human being. It's disgusting, obviously. That's the seriousness of it. So, gossiping about people behind their back, saying things about them, this is what backbiting is. And it is so seriously sinful in Islam. And yet it is something that in our present times, people indulge in. But just because everybody else is indulging in something doesn't mean that you or I have to indulge in what other people are doing, especially if it is very harmful, both to our own souls and also to other people. 1, 2, 3. There's 3 pages here on backbiting. No, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so 10. Yeah, it's about 10 pages there on backbiting. I'm not going to read all of that, obviously. We don't have the time to cover that today. But if you want to read it for yourself, this is the Ihya Ulum Al-Din by Imam Al-Ghazali, and this is in volume 3. Volume 3? Yeah. And 16, cheating and slander. God says in the Quran, in the Surah 68, verse 11, a slanderer going about with calumnies, hindering all good, transgressing beyond bounds. The sage Ibn Mubarak said, Hamas means an illegitimate issue who does not keep words secret. This shows that he who does not keep words secret and roams about giving news to ears is like an illegitimate son. So it's something which there's a lot written here actually. The Prophet ﷺ said, said, shall I not inform you of the worst of you? The companions asked, O Prophet of God, tell us that. The Prophet ﷺ said, they are those who walk with slander, create disturbance among friends, and mix falsehood with the faults of the pious people. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a person gives a hint to disgrace a Muslim unjustly, God will disgrace him in hell on the resurrection day. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a man uses a word in order to disgrace an innocent person in this world, it becomes a duty of God to burn him in hellfire on the resurrection day. The Prophet ﷺ said, he who bears witness against a Muslim which is not true, in his case, he shall get his place in hell. So you see, it's very, very, slander is really serious and something that we must absolutely avoid. Again, there's a number of pages written on this here, which I am not going to read because we're going to be here a long time. 17. This is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is another evil of the tongue. It is to go to two enemies and introduce each of them as a friend and to hold one opinion with each of them. So, you go to two people who are enemies and you pretend to be friends with both of them by saying opposite to each of them and not having a proper position yourself. This is hypocrisy. 18. Praise. Another evil of the tongue is to praise. In some cases, not every case, but in some cases, praise is unlawful. There are 6 harms of praise, out of which 4 harms fall on the praiser and 2 harms fall on the hearer of praise. Basically, without going into it, the danger of praising is if you praise someone, then there's a danger it can affect their ego and make them think more about themselves than what is true. So it doesn't mean that you don't praise people, but just it's something to be careful of. Don't excessively praise people is, I think, the best advice on this. And if you are praised, be careful you don't fall into pride, because this is a real big danger of it. 19, carelessness. Another harm of the tongue is carelessness or inattention to words, especially when they are uttered in connection with religious affairs. The Prophet ﷺ said, let none among you say what God wishes and what you wish, rather say God wishes and then what you wish. So just be careful, what you say. And 20, because these were 20 harms of the tongue, is questions of ordinary men about God. Another evil of the tongue is the questions of ordinary men about God. his attributes, his words, and his tongue. These attributes of God are of two kinds, uncreated and created. It is the duty of ordinary men to follow what is in the Quran about commands and prohibitions. To understand the Quran is difficult for many. The Prophet ﷺ said, leave to me what I left for you, leave to me what I left for you, because your predecessors were destroyed because of their excessive questions and owing to acute differences with their prophets. So, I mean, this is excessively questioning things which Islam teaches beyond what is reasonable. It doesn't mean that we can't question things, but at the same time, there's a balance in all things. Once you question something and you've received a reasonable answer, you don't need to keep going on and on and on about it to excess. So these are 20 evils of the tongue. And to give you some idea, this chapter in English translation, I mean, I haven't got the Arabic in front of me today, so I can't tell you how much pages the Arabic is. But we go back to the beginning. Wow. And you'll see why I haven't read everything to you here, except going through the titles of these 20 evils of the tongue, because in this English translation, it is about 22 pages that Imam Al-Ghazali wrote about the harms of the tongue. And I think even just that alone, that point alone, there are 22 pages here written about the harms of the tongue. It is enough that should make us realize there's a lot of danger that can come from not being careful what we say. Because 22 pages here that Imam Ghazali dedicated to it. So the main thing is just be careful. Stick to things which are true. Stick to things which are good. Try to refrain from saying bad things or gossiping about people. Find something more constructive. Yeah, if you're used to those sorts of habits, maybe that will take a bit of time to change your habits, but it can be done. And of course, we're going to make many mistakes along the way, but at least if you're aiming high and you're striving to be better and to do what's right and what's good, Allah will see this and Allah will reward you for all of your intentions and your efforts. But if you just disregard it and say, oh, no, it's too difficult, I can't do that, then, you're never going to change anything. So it's like to be aware of these things more than the detail. You don't even need all of this detail that's in these 22 pages, but just be aware that you need to be careful what you say and don't say things which are deliberately hurtful for people, because remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every single human being, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares about all people. So we need to be careful, even if we have a difference of opinion with someone, even we fall out with someone, how we handle those situations. And I'm not saying do nothing, but we need to be careful how we handle those situations. And there's no need for excessively saying bad things about someone, because all we end up doing is harming our own soul in the process. There's another thing that people talk about these days is about being toxic. And in essence, this is what being toxic is referring to. And it becomes very difficult to be around someone like that. So, inshallah, taking this advice of Imam Ghazali, I hope, inshallah, that is of benefit to everybody and you found that useful. I'm going to sign off now. I will not be doing my sohbet on Monday as per usual. So if I can do one at some point, I will slot it in, but it will not be at the usual time, I don't think. And if not, then I should be back online, I think, probably next Friday for a Friday Reflections. Until then, if you're in the UK, I wish you all a very good evening. And wherever you are, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all. Good night.